So when Kenny came up to me about 4 weeks ago, he came up to me with a big smile on his face and he put his arm around me. And at first I was extremely excited. And then he opened his mouth and I wasn't. He came up to me and he goes, with all of those theology classes that you're taking and all the Christian coursework you've been doing, what do you think about getting up there and preaching on the 30th? And I looked at him and I said, you realize that I have not taken one theology course yet, or any Christian-related coursework for that matter. So as I started to see the smile on his face fade, I said yes before he could take back the offer. So clearly both of us weren't thinking. I did, though, in that time, I asked him, I said, was basically just trying to get the smallest of lifelines from him, which I feel, as I've gotten to know him, is extremely hard to do. I said, what do you want me to preach about? Is there something in particular you want me to preach about? Are you getting ready to go into a new series of sermons that I could maybe put a transition in for? And his response was, I should have asked him, I said, you have one prepared that I can read? And his response was, and I have him quoted saying, preach whatever you want to preach about. Pray about it and just preach whatever the Lord puts on your heart. And it is a few days before New Year's, so you can make your sermon about that or some kind of resolution. And in my head, I originally thought, geesh, Pastor Kenny, thanks for reading me a book of Christian cliches. But over the course of the next 4 weeks, me saying yes, I had no idea what that was going to bring into my life over the next month. It took only a couple days later before I felt like most of the aspects of my life were starting to be attacked spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally. And it got to the point to where everything, I just felt like it was the second he asked is when things started falling apart. It's like I compared it to, as people say that you're digging yourself a hole, but it was like mine was being dug for me and I didn't have the shovel to get out of it. So I did a lot of what a lot of us would do when things are getting tough, and I took the millennial route and I just tried to quit. So I reached out to Pastor Kenny a few days later and I said, why me? A little sarcastic, a little frustrated. I said, why me? I said, what are Rick and Kevin doing? I said, are they going on vacay with you? Are they got some time off as well? We're just scraping the bottom of the barrel here. So Kenny basically just, kind of calmed me down, and so I went back at it. But then it took what transpired over 4 months. After reaching out to Kenny a week later, it's like all of it tripled. Everything just became so much worse. All the aforementioned issues I had before, whether they were my issues or other issues, they had grown. So I again reached out to Pastor Kenny to try to quit, give him a good 2-week notice. I said, Kenny, how can I come up here on New Year's and preach about New Year's resolutions and be up here and not feel like a hypocrite? After talking to a very, very, very patient Kenny, I felt like he was almost anticipating having this conversation with me. But he did remind me something very important, and I was a little frustrated when he reminded me because I had to take 2.5 weeks of a sermon and then re-edit it and almost rewrite it because he changed it for me without knowing it. He reminded me that when we do things just to glorify God is when Satan tries to come into our lives. He usually wants to attack those aspects that you're glorifying him in. So sitting there in Kenny's office that day, I told myself that on December 30th today that I would get a victory and that I would be up here. But then I made it bigger than that. I've never honestly ever set a New Year's resolution because why do you need a day to commit to a year of doing something good? But that day I did. I made one. It was that what I was going through really sucked, and I felt like it was happening as a result of me pushing more towards my faith, learning more, growing more. And it stunk really bad. It was rough. I was exhausted, mentally, emotionally, physically exhausted. But I made a deal with myself that day that my first New Year's resolution is something that I hope all of you guys today drop yours and join me, because I will need plenty of help with it, is to attempt to glorify God in all things that I'm doing, not just Sunday mornings, not just during small group, but glorify Him in every little, tiny, even the most insignificant aspects of my life. So the moral of this story is, if Kenny ever walks up to you with just a cheese smile on his face and he puts his arm around you, no. It's no. And I was actually joking with my dad. I said, and it's probably a little harsh, and it's a total joke, but I was joking with him. I said, the second Kenny asked me to do that, he brought the devil in my house. So how can we glorify God in everything we do? We are reminded of this in Colossians 3:23. It says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord. If we think about that for a minute, it's asking us to work as if the Lord is watching, work as if you were working for the Lord. How many of us think our boss is the exact opposite of the Lord? Most of us. How many of us are struggling to glorify God in the workplace? I know from being in the trade industry off and on, I've been around and have chosen to walk away, not be a part of, and chosen to participate in your shop talk or your water cooler talk. How often are we getting involved with the gossip at work? And like Kenny says, how often are we stealing time from our employer? I take 10 minutes on every break. 10 extra minutes on every break I've ever taken for any employer. But most importantly, how many of us have had the conversation at the workplace about Jesus Christ, your faith? How many of us have witnessed in our workplace? So for us, how many of you is that your resolution? We have the opportunity to glorify God with our bodies, thoughts, emotions, and our actions. Many of us, myself included, struggle with our temper and our anger. How many of us are trying to work on breaking bad habits, addictions? How many of us are working and praying just to have a little bit more patience, or any of the fruits for that matter? In Proverbs 3:5-6, it states, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your path." This verse here in Proverbs, what really stuck out to me is to not lean on your own understanding. And that, for me, is an issue. And I don't get why it's an issue, because if we really break it down on the things that are important, if we're not leaning on God and we're leaning on our own understanding, how often do those things just not work out? In Proverbs, again, 25:28, I love this verse because it reminds me of myself. "A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls." And it cracks me up just because it's pertaining to this sermon and this resolution. But how many of us secretly, your New Year's resolution this year is to buy one less drywall patch from Home Depot? It's fun. My idea of having my anger under control is when I see that piece of drywall that looks like it could have a perfect fist mark in it, and I clench my fist. There hasn't never been a time that I've done this and not heard, "Don't you put your fist through that wall." And I say to myself, I got this. Fist through wall. And to me, when I say I got it, it means I didn't break anything. It means it just stings. But me being the man and feeling like I have to have control in every aspect that I can, me getting excited because I felt like I controlled my anger by not breaking a bone, and I get to fly a W because of it. Is our resolution to become healthier or to get back into shape? And if it is, these are all great things. But Are we doing these things to glorify God? Is he on your mind when you're walking into the gym? It sounds so silly, but do you pray before you grab a weight? Is he the number one reason you're following a meal plan? I understand if any of us are trying to get healthy, get back into shape, that's a great thing to do. But are we following that meal? Because when I want to get back into shape, two things come to my mind immediately. I want to get back into shape so I can get self-confidence, so I can feel good, so I can look good, and then, also maybe for my wife. But how many of us are wanting to get back into shape, get healthy, get back into the gym because they were gifted this body by God and they need to honor it? Are we glorifying God in our marriage? To me, as a man, like my anger, this is another one I feel like I should always be able to control. This is an issue I feel like a lot of us men deal with. We have this sense of, I got this. I can do that. I've got it under control because I'm a man. And that's what men do. They fix things. They take care of things. They control things. They handle things. And it's funny because I can sit there and I can get that, oh, I did that. I got this. I can handle that mentality. And this is what I see. This is how I feel what God's doing. He goes, no, you don't. Nuh-uh. You have never got this. You still don't got this. God uses our marriages to teach us how to serve others over ourselves. But what are we doing with that? Are we taking those words and are we putting our spouse's needs over our own? And then are we putting other couples' needs over our own? Are we loving our neighbor? Is strengthening your marriage a resolution this year? Some of you guys may be in year 10, 15, 20, 25 of your marriage. And I can't comprehend that whatsoever. But I can see how after 25 years of being married to the same person, things can become almost mundane. It's the same stuff, different day. You're going through the motions. You're just living. So is that your resolution, to strengthen your marriage or to fix a marriage if you're having issues in it? If things aren't working out the way that you had intended to. So, for me, you could name any resolution. One of the ones I've named, one I didn't name, and I could tell you I probably need to work on all of them. But with that being said, we can think of 12, 15 resolutions right now that all of us have in this room. And we could take the route of working on one of those things a year and just seeing what sticks, seeing what works out. But then again, are you going to get 15 years to work on all 15 of those things? And if you're glorifying God in every aspect of your life, would you accomplish all of those things in 1 year, in less than 1 year? And if we were doing it as a congregation, what would we accomplish as a church? So to me, in order to keep this going for myself, I needed to try to find my examples. I needed to try to find people I feel that are doing this, examples of what happens when you're doing this. So I started really thinking about it. Back when I was in high school, my dad and I went to church together in Mattoon, and we had a pastor. His name was Don Roberts. And now, Don was an older gentleman who preached an older style of sermon, but I fell in love with his preaching because he was such a good teacher that he could take anything in the Bible and make sure that you understood it by the time you walked out of that room. And that, to me, was a gift. We've all been in the Bible before and had to refer to our study portion, ask a buddy, what does this mean? Am I interpreting this wrong? And I always accredited him for that. And honestly, he was so good at it, it's the only thing I could think of when I thought of him. Now, my dad, on the other hand, would spend 1 to 2 days a week for a few hours at a time with this man, as they became very, very close. And one day he heard me talking about the reasons I really loved listening to Don preach. And he said, "Son, you're right. But I don't," he goes, "Son, you're right, but I don't know many people that have the relationship with God the way that man does." I said, "Okay, explain." And he said, "That man trusts God so much and attempts to glorify him in every single thing that he does that I've watched him say a prayer before changing a light bulb." And I said, "That's nonsense." My initial reaction, because in the time it took me to say, before I change a light bulb, I say a prayer to change a light bulb, I'm done. You don't need to do that. I didn't see it. And now, when I was preparing this message, I was trying to think of where I could find those examples, and that story popped into my head. And I think now, when I hear that a man prays to God even before he changes a light bulb, to me that's not silly. That is one of the most intimate, personal, closest relationships I've seen someone have with Jesus Christ. And that, to me, that you have denied yourself to the point that you won't do the most simple of tasks, like changing a light bulb, without first talking to your Father. And that's something to look up to. I think that's someplace that all of us need to get to. The most perfect example I can give of someone glorifying, and all they do would be Jesus Christ himself. Every action, every thought, every word, every moment, everything that man did on this earth was just to simply glorify God. And you know what he didn't do that we do a lot of, that I do a lot of? We all know the story in Matthew chapter 4, where it talks about Jesus being tempted by Satan. What you don't read is him walking out of that and go, "Woo, did you guys see that? Did you guys see what I just did? Did you see how I got this? That's all me all day. That's what I do." No, he didn't. What did he do? He quoted his Father 3 times. And that's where the credit went. I feel like it's super easy for, me personally and us as a group of people to be okay with complacency. We understand. What we don't understand, we try to learn. We get up on Sundays, show up to church, sing a few songs, hopefully learn something new, shake hands, talk to our church family before going home, and eventually restarting our week. But what are we doing Monday through Saturday? What are we doing when we show up to work? Monday morning, are we standing at the shop, finishing our 3rd or 4th cup of coffee, talking about things we shouldn't be talking about? Are we coming home and I've had a long day, so I'm not going to be a participant with my family this evening? It blows my mind when I think about it. I can take, which I have blown through as I look at the time, I can take a sermon that I have recited, prepared in my head for the past 4 weeks, multiple times a day. I can take the last month worth of study and research. I can take all the time that I've put into this, and I can sum it up very, very shortly. We as a church, we as an individual, we as the leaders of our home, who strongly influences not just our own salvation, our kids', our grandkids', possibly our spouses, possibly family members that we will never even get to acknowledge or meet. So we are trusting Him with the ultimate, most important thing that we are ever going to do, and that is what happens after we die. We trust him with our eternal salvation. When we think about what we're doing here, it is a grain of sand to the time spent, to what happens after. So when we think about how important of a decision that we made and how much trust we are giving to God to take care of us after we've died, how can we trust him with that and then not trust him with our thoughts? How can we trust him with our salvation and not trust him with our temper? How can I trust how he's going to handle me and my family after we've passed? How can I trust him with my salvation and not trust him with my marriage? How can I trust him with my salvation and not trust him when I'm at the workplace? How can I trust him with my salvation and not trust him when I clearly hear, "Don't you put your fist through that wall again"? We can't keep trusting him with the most important things that matter to us and not take the time to trust him with the smallest things. And I'm the first one to admit that I'm just as bad at it. I got this complex. You know, at the very end of all of my research, readings, things like that, I found something on Got Questions that I was like, man, this just about sums up my sermon. It says, to glorify God in everything, we must exercise faith, Hebrews 11:6, love without hypocrisy, Romans 12:9, deny ourselves, Luke 9:23, be filled with the Spirit, Ephesians 5:18, and offer ourselves as living sacrifices to God, Romans 12:1. I was trying to think of where I had noticed when someone, and something that we can compare it to, so rather than something that we've read about, I wanted to find something that, a situation I noticed where someone truly took a moment to glorify God in everything they did and the repercussions of that. And I seen it last Sunday in this building, and I didn't realize I'd seen it until I was preparing my outline this week. Our praise team does a great job with only 3 or 4 people up here at a time. And every member of this praise team is truly up here, not for their own benefit, not to get you pumped up, because it's their opportunity to glorify God. And all of them up here are truly doing that for that 15 minutes that they're up here. They take this 15 minutes, they stand here, and they give everything they have to God. And it's really amazing to watch, and you take it for granted up until our kids come in here from Sunday school, and they sing a couple songs, and then the praise team comes up here, and the kids stay in here, and they sing a couple songs. I got to watch Dennis standing over here in this corner, giving it to the Lord like he usually does. He worships with no filter, worships purely just to glorify God. And his 10-year-old son, Dimitri, is standing right here, who we all hear, even sometimes in this sanctuary Sunday mornings, singing in children's church, which is amazing. And he gets that from the example his father sets. But I got to watch 10-year-old Dimitri over here watching his dad, praising the Lord, giving it all to him, raising his hands. And then I got to watch a 10-year-old boy who was sitting here singing as loud as he could, praising the Lord, giving it all to him. I got to watch that 10-year-old boy look at his dad and raise his hands to the Lord together as they praised. That is amazing. That is amazing. That son sees his father glorifying God, and his father has set that example that his son now wants to follow. And the result of that is a 10-year-old boy who sings like no one else is in this sanctuary and raise his hands regardless of who's standing behind him. That is amazing. Over the course of 2019, I want to pray to God before I change a light bulb. I want to pray to God before I change my oil. I want to pray to God before I go to bed. When my wife asks me to pray with her, I don't want to recite the prayer I've said before dinner since I was 5. And the easiest way I can do that, and the easiest way we can all do that, is just admitting that I don't got this. And I've never had this. And I won't ever have this. And that's all right. And that's all right. So with that being said, over the next year, I'm going to not only attempt to do this, but I'm going to attempt to write it down and write down situations like Dimitri over here. And I want to see in a year how often I fail, because I'm sure it'll happen a lot, where it's worked out for me. But if we do it as a church family, for ourselves and for our church, what can we accomplish together as a church? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this Sunday morning. I thank you for the opportunity you've given to me to say something that I feel is your word that you've put on my heart, Lord. I pray that somebody here, you got that message to them, Lord. It was a message that they needed to hear. Lord, I pray that it's a message that we can all take up and do together. It's a challenge that we can all do together, Lord. Lord, I pray that everyone in this room, from this day forward, attempts to seek you and glorify you in everything that they do, even changing a light bulb. Lord, I pray that our 2019 is filled with blessings as a church family, as an individual. Lord, I pray that you again take our trials and turn them into such important lessons. Lord, as we leave here today, be with each and every one of us. Be with us Monday through Saturday as we walk into work, as we walk into home after, when we're getting frustrated this week. Lord, that I pray that you give me the strength as well to back the words that you put in my mouth. Lord, I thank you for this beautiful, beautiful Sunday in December, and that we all have safe travels home. In your name.